This is an F22C1 out of our AP2 Honda S2000. We've got it fully disassembled here. We're going to be rebuilding it, and let's look at the parts we're going to be using. We have a lot of OEM Honda parts here on the table. We're doing pretty much just an OEM refresh on this engine. We're going to be upgrading a few things while we're in here. To start, we have an OEM oil pump. This is brand new from Honda. We have a lower main seal kit, so this is all the bottom end gaskets as well, which is really good. New timing guides. We're going to be redoing all the timing on this thing. This is a cylinder head gasket and kind of the top end gasket kit, so literally everything on the top end of the engine is going to be brand new. We have new OEM Honda piston rings. This engine actually has a forged piston from factory, which is awesome for what we're going to be doing. We are going to be putting a Grady turbo kit on this engine. We have a new timing tensioner, a new timing chain, as well as the oil pump chain assemblies new as well. We do have new main bolts for the crankshaft and a set of ARP cylinder head studs. So we're going to be putting a stud in this thing to hold it down better. More clamping force on the cylinder head is going to handle the boost pressures very nicely. We also have ARP connecting rod bolts instead of the factory bolts. We're going to be upgrading those. We have a set of ACL race bearings, main rod and thrust. I've had great success with all ACL bearings. Everything we've put them in has worked out exceptionally well. We're going to be doing some basic maintenance items. We have a new water pump here and a new thermostat. We have a K&N oil filter that's going to be going on, and we have some good Motul break-in engine oil. Because we're going to be rebuilding this engine, the rings need to be seated and the bearings and everything just needs to be kind of worn in while we run the engine for the first time, and this engine oil is going to help us do that. Something like a synthetic isn't really ideal for breaking in an engine, especially with a new set of rings, because it's going to wear and it's going to wear match the ring to the bore, and you want an oil that is built for that. I've used Motul break-in oil on a few engines around here with great success. If you guys are going to be rebuilding an engine, you need to run break-in oil for the first few minutes of the engine running, and Motul break-in oil is amazing, and so we're going to be using it on this engine. We've used it on a few engines around here at the throttle shop with excellent success, so we're going to keep on, baby. Let's go. So as far as the parts that came with the engine, we haven't done a whole lot to it. We've changed a few things. Most of what we've been doing is cleaning. So we've been using our dry ice blasting machine to clean just all the gunk and crap off everywhere. Timing cover, the lower pan, the block, everything looks beautiful. We did send the cylinder head out to get machined, so it's got a nice fresh cut on it, as well as inspected. Everything looks really good with it. We added an oil pan baffle. It's a welded baffle, so one of the main problems with the F22s and the F20Cs is oil starvation. If you're going to be taking this car on track, something like a really long bank turn, they can oil starve, and so we've added this oil baffle. If whoever wins this car wants to take it on track, they absolutely can. They're not going to have any issues with it. Aside from that, we've just been cleaning up. We cleaned up the pistons, got the old rings out. Two of the cylinders were starting to show signs that the oil control rings were starting to seize, which is not good. So we've got that all cleaned up, and our new rings are going to take care of that. So overall, these pistons are in excellent shape. I have no problem reusing them, and they're forged from the factory, which is really cool. So we haven't done a whole lot to the engine block. This block is actually in really good shape. You've cleaned it up. I've cleaned up the deck. We've dry ice blasted the whole thing, and it looks absolutely beautiful. We did not send this engine block in for machine work. You guys know when we usually do engine builds here, we're throwing a piston and a connecting rod. We will send the engine block in to get machined and have the piston skirt clearance to the bore clearance correct. But because we're using a factory piston, this actually has an FRM liner, or the cylinder bores are FRM. We don't want to damage the bores, and everything looks really good. So we're going to leave it as is. There's really no reason to send it to the machine shop if we don't have to, let alone have them destroy or damage the bores. And the bore spec should be where it needs to be. This was an excellent running engine when we pulled it apart. However, we're going to begin our work by doing a lot of measurements. I have a dial bore gauge here. We're going to be checking each individual bore for taper and wear, and then we're going to move on to the crank and start measuring our journals, because that hasn't been out to the machine shop either, because we don't need any work to it. So let's get out the dial indicators and the micrometers, start doing some measurements, and then we'll put this engine together. Right here, the bottom is actually what sweeps our micrometer up top. So if this is parallel, it's going to be the shortest measurement between those 2 points. So if I sweep it to the side, that measurement between these two spaces gets longer, and the same thing if I rotate it this way. So when I put it in there, and I'll kind of roll it back and forth, and you'll see the needle sweep, and where it's at its zero spot, which is where I zeroed it, is the shortest distance, which is actually our bore measurement. So just give it a little sweep, you'll see it come up, and then it kind of stops, and then it starts going the other direction. So next up, we have our crankshaft here, and we're just going to give it a quick visual inspection. We're also going to be using some micrometers to measure the journals and make sure everything's copacetic with it. So first of all, everything looks good. I don't see any significant scoring at all. We had a little bit of scratches and bearing material in the original bearings when we took this engine apart. It picked up something, but the bearing did its job and kind of absorbed the contaminant, which is good. I don't really see any damage on these journals. We don't have any excessive scoring, so I'm just kind of running my finger along everything. Usually if you'll have like a score word journal, you can catch it with your fingernail or you'll notice it, but these things look really good. So we're gonna take our mics and we're gonna measure everything and make sure that we don't have an undersized or an oversized journal here and everything is pretty consistent. And then once we do that, this thing will be ready to go in the car. We're in good shape. For the crankshaft, we have a little bit of variation, but nothing that is out of the ordinary. Everything is really good here. It looks in spec. All of our measurements are spot on, and this crankshaft is ready to go back in the engine. Let's move on to piston rings. Next up, we're going to be checking our piston ring gaps. So here we have brand new OEM Honda piston rings. We're going to be reusing the pistons. These are our forged piston from factory, which is really cool. So we're going to open them up, check our end gap. Because this is going to be essentially a turbo street engine, we're going to be running pretty much factory gaps. Typically on something like the Eclipse engine or the Super engine, where we're going to be pushing a lot of power and really high boost, you'd want to open the ring gap up simply because the ring gap pretty much determines how much heat the cylinder can take. So when it's in there, if you can look in there and you see that little gap. So that's your ring end gap essentially. Now this one isn't 100% set up because I haven't pushed it in and set it flat yet, but essentially that gap is there for space. So when the engine starts getting hot, that ring gap will close up and seal the piston. If you start introducing a lot of heat into the engine, the piston rings can actually touch, and that's essentially a catastrophic failure of the engine because when they touch, they have no more room to grow. And so instead of growing into the gap like they're supposed to, it'll touch, it'll continue expanding, and then the ring will go up or down, and it will literally blow the skirt of the piston apart and blow the ring lands up. And so a lot of times it just destroys everything and you have a piston failure. So if we were to run a stock ring gap and extremely high boost, like something on a Mark IV Super where we're pushing about 1,000 horsepower, the ring gap would be too tight and it would explode. But since we're running moderate power level through this engine and it is going to be a street car, we're not going to be pushing excessive power through it. A stock ring gap is going to get us where we need to be, and we're going to replace some of these things. Are going to run just fine. Fuel Fest presented by Throtl is coming up quick June 3rd at Irwindale Speedway. The entire Throtl team is going to be there, and we're bringing all the cars. The Supra, the Eclipse, the Civic, the S2000 is going to get debuted there. We're also giving away a set of wheels at the Throtl booth, so stop by. If you guys want to save money on a set of tickets, hit the link in the description. We'll see you guys there. Let's get back to these piston rings. Our piston ring end gaps are in good shape, very consistent for being out of the box. I didn't have to adjust anything, which is good. Now we're gonna kind of experiment a little bit. I think we may have to stray away from the standard way of assembling an engine, which typically you'll drop the crank in, bolt the crank down, and then you'll drop your piston and connecting rods in. My fear here is that the cradle here takes up so much real estate that I don't know if the crank in place, I'm gonna be able to get my hands around it to pull the connecting rod up. So I'm gonna throw the main bearings on this, drop the crank in, and just kind of see how much space it takes up. Because once we bolt the crank down, it's bolted down and we can't move it. And if I can't feed the connecting rod, bearing, and all that stuff up through the top, that's gonna be a big issue. So we're gonna drop our main bearings on, drop the crank on, mock this on here and see if it's doable. If not, we'll put the rings on our piston, put them in the block with the crankshaft out, and then install the crank after. So let's get our main bearings on. Main bearings are on. These are our thrust washers. So we're gonna pop these guys on like that and like that. And when we actually bolt the cradle down, all of this stuff is going to be lubricated. But for now, since I just wanna see what it does, a moment of truth. So I don't think I'm gonna be able to fit my hands in there. It's gonna be tight. I think we'll be okay. We're gonna put the crank on. If it doesn't work out, then it sucks to be me. Everything is nice and lubed up. We're gonna drop our crankshaft in, get it bolted down with our cradle, and let's go. Before we put our cradle on, I like to put the rim main seal on, so we're gonna do that right now because we can, and it's nice and easy. Our form and place gasket is set. Now it's time to torque our main caps down, and then we will torque the rest of the cradle and then start throwing some pistons in. This is a 1/2-inch torque wrench by Eastwood. This one's really cool. It measures pound-feet as well as torque angle, which is perfect because we need to torque angle these. So we have to do 22 pound-feet on each one, and then we're going 60 degrees and the main caps will be done. Main caps are all tight. We're going to tighten the hardwares on the outside of the pan. She still spins very nice, which is a really good sign. So we're also going to put a dowel indicator on here and measure end thrust, end play. That should be within spec as we replace the thrust bearings, and then we'll start putting pistons in. Money! Crank, perfect. Time to install some piston rings and get these pistons in. So we're starting with cylinder 1. We're gonna do cylinder 4, cut their sister pistons, and we'll do 2 and 3. So we've got our piston all cleaned up. This engine had some crud in it, as you guys know if you saw the breakdown. The ring lands on the oil control ring just had a bunch of gunk in it, so they were kind of starting to seize up. So we have them all cleaned out now, and we're gonna throw some new Honda rings on. We're gonna start with the oil control ring, and then we're gonna get into our compression rings. So our piston rings are on, and as you can see, every single one of them just glides around, even the oil control ring, super nicely. So the oil control ring was actually stuck on cylinder 2 or 3, and I could not even rotate it. As you can see, since we've cleaned it and put new rings on, everything spins like butter, which is what you want. So we're gonna put our ring gaps at kind of the standard orientation for installing piston rings. The thing is when engines are running, the rings are rotating inside unless it's a 2-stroke. So it's not like it matters a ton, but it's just kind of good practice. So we've got our second compression ring forward, our rear compression ring back, and then our oil control ring gaps on the side with the wave ring kind of off center. So let's pop this piston in. We're in good shape. We got 2 in. We're gonna go down here. Oh yeah! Now we actually have ARP hardware for the connecting rod. Look at that, dude. That's what I'm talking about right there. Because we have ARP hardware, we can actually plastic gauge these because they're not torque to yield. So we're gonna put our rod bearing caps on, drop them on with some plastic gauge, double check that everything is good where it needs to be. That's why I like plastic gauge, because even if you spend all the time measuring and miking all that stuff, it's always really good to just double check at the last second that everything's money. So we're gonna do that. Got them all torqued. Our plastic gauge is under the bearing, getting crushed right now, so we're gonna take it off and check it. So we're between 0.0015 and 0.002, which is good. So that is a little bit on the looser end of spec, but that's still within spec, so we're in good shape. Cylinder 4 is about the same as cylinder 1 was, so very consistent clearances, which makes me feel really good. So we're gonna clean this off, we're gonna lubricate the connecting rod bearings, put these on, torque them for the final time, then move on to cylinder 2 and 3. We're at bottom dead center for 2 and 3. Now it's time to put those pistons in. Our 4-cylinder has 4 cylinders again. Look at that. It's all weird seeing them like they're all almost at top dead center. So we're gonna push these guys down. 1 and 2. Flip it over, check our rod bearings. engine is being extremely consistent. Let's see what this one's at. Very consistent, very good. I like that, happy with that. So we're gonna put this back together with some lube, torque everything down, and then our rotating assembly will be finished. Our rotating assembly is finished. Everything went together beautifully. Our thrust is in spec, our bearing specs are perfect, and our ring gaps are where they need to be, and everything is installed. It spins freely, feels good. We're gonna flip the block over, put our oil pump on, and start getting oil flowing through this thing. Now we're gonna do kind of a little bleed. Yeah, we're gonna bleed it actually. So I'm gonna pour oil in the pickup and we're gonna start spinning the pump by hand to start getting fluid moving through it. Ideally, we're gonna go until oil is coming out of here, like all over the ground. And then we're gonna take our brand new Canon oil filter, fill it up with engine oil, throw it back on there, and then keep spinning it until it starts coming out of other places. And that's gonna let me know that the oil pump is working and that we have oil moving through the block. Next up, it's time for the cylinder head. We have a brand new OEM Honda cylinder head gasket here, and let's get this puppy on. Next up, we're gonna be installing our studs. These are ARP head studs. Since we're gonna be boosting this thing, it's always a good idea to upgrade the hardware, holding the cylinder head onto the block. Increased clamping force is always a good thing. We're gonna drop some studs on. Our cylinder head is installed. We got our new ARP head studs in. Everything's nice and tight. Now we're gonna start to run on some gears, chains, guides, and then we're gonna get our camshafts in here, get everything all timed up. Our oil pump chain is installed. We got our guides back on, so now we're gonna start installing the timing chain setup on this thing. It's a little funky. I've never timed one of these before, so hopefully it goes well. And we're gonna do it pretty much in the reverse order that I took this thing apart. So we're gonna put the new chain on our gear, slide the gear in and get it bolted down, put our guides on, and then we'll start working on our cams, getting those installed. We'll get everything timed up. We have our timing chain on with our new guides. I don't have the tensioner in yet. We're gonna put the cams in next, make sure everything's good, and then we'll put our tensioner in. So for now, I'm gonna lube our valve springs, then we'll get our rocker assemblies on here, and then we'll start putting our cams on. We have our rocker VTEC assembly back on as well as our camshafts. Now I just need to tighten everything down, so we're gonna throw you up on the tripod for that. We've got our cams installed. They are where they were when I took it apart. We've got our chain installed. Everything's ready to go. So we're gonna check our timing. So I'm gonna put tension on the guide here because we don't have our tensioner in yet. That's here, that's next. But we're gonna spin it twice, make sure we have top dead center still. And if we're good, then we're good. Perfect. We're timed, baby. Let's go. yeah, look at that. That's what I'm talking about. Time for some VTEC solenoids. Where'd it go? Here it is. This is our oil control VTEC assembly, essentially. So this is the solenoid that kicks on and off the VTEC. And we have, oh, it's got a little filter in there. We have a new gasket for it. And then I can go on the engine and I want to prime it again so we can get oil through the head and the cams and all the stuff that it should be getting through. Now that essentially everything in our oiling system is complete, we are going to be changing a few things when we put the Grade A turbo kit on, but for now I want to flip it over, I want to re-prime the engine oil, and I want to wait till I start seeing oil coming out of the cams and all the things and all the places that oil should be coming out, oil's coming out. So this is like the last final prime before we put the timing cover, the oil pan, and everything back together and actually drop this in the car where we'll oil prime it with the starter once we're in. So let's do that. Our engine is fully oil primed and we're going to put the timing cover back on, but before we do that, we're going to throw a new OEM Honda front main seal on. So it's going to be way easier to do this with the cover out of the car, and so we're going to do that. Installing our timing cover. Now we're going to let the form-in-place gasket cure before we torque all of the bolts. So while I'm waiting to do that, I'm actually going to start adjusting the lash on all of the valves. These have rockers. They have a mechanical lash adjuster on them, so we're going to adjust them, get them into spec, and then we'll be essentially ready to throw our valve cover on, be done with the top end of the engine. So let's go. The form-in-place gasket on our timing cover has finished curing, so we're going to go ahead and torque the timing cover down, flip it over, and install our newly baffled oil pan. Before we put the RTV on and actually get our oil pan on, I want to make sure it fits because we added a baffle inside. So that guy is going to cure any oil starvation issues under high G cornering or high load cornering. And we need to make sure that it actually fits, which it does. Perfect. Let's clean everything off and put our RTV on. RTV has cured for about half an hour, so we're going to go ahead and torque down all of the hardwares that hold the oil pan on. Then we'll move into our valve cover, get our crank pulley on, and we'll be effectively done with the long block. So now we're going to throw our valve cover on. Boop. Got to get our front crank pulley on, and then we got to start adding all sorts of fun stuff, like the intake manifold and our Grade A turbo. And there we have it, a completely rebuilt F22C1. Before we finish this video, I want to get this thing fully dressed. So we're gonna get our water pump, our belts, our alternator, intake manifold, all of that stuff on. So let's get to it. Got our water pump housing on and bolted down. We've reran our cooler line. We're actually gonna take the old water pump off because it hasn't been removed yet and replace it with a brand new one. We've got all of our accessories on. It's time to throw a serpentine belt on. Let's do it. Intake manifold time, baby. Let's go. So I went to go grab our turbo and manifold off the shelf over there, and I found this. This is a fluid damper. I love fluid dampers. I didn't realize we had one for this car, and I found it. So we're gonna put it on. So we're gonna get this junk off and put this beautiful damper on. Look at this gasket, dude. That's a hot exhaust manifold gasket. That's a Greddy exhaust manifold gasket. That's what that is. First piece to go on our engine for the Greddy turbo kit. This is their turbo manifold. Very nice little bottom mount piece right here. Much better than the stock one. We have the turbo for our Greddy turbo kit here. So this is a Garrett. This is a GTX 2867R Gen 2. This thing is gonna be a lot of fun on this S2000 engine. So let's get this thing bolted up. Our F22C1 is fully rebuilt and ready to go back into the S2000. We hung the Greddy turbo kit off. We still have a little bit of lines to run and some things to figure out with that, so we're gonna be getting to that in the next episode, but our engine is finished. This thing is fully rebuilt. New rings, new bearings, new gaskets, and seals complete all the way through the engine. This thing is ready to fire up for its first time back in our S2000, so stay tuned for that in a future episode. My question to you is, what engine should we rebuild next? We did the F22, we've done a 2J, we did the 4G, and we did an RB26. Let me know down in the comments what engine should we rebuild. This engine build series has been a lot of fun. I love rebuilding all sorts of different engines. The Honda was an unexpected engine, but fun nonetheless. So let me know what you guys want to see. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.